Welcome to Countdown to Classic, a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday and Wednesday we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I am your host, Josh Corbett, and I'm an avid fan of the vanilla days of World of Warcraft. And I'm a podcast veteran, so I figured, why not combine my two passions and bring you this show. With this being one of our Way Back Wednesday episodes, we'll be taking a very deep dive into the lore of World of Warcraft and discussing in detail one particular piece of content. Now, all the information that you're going to hear today is sourced from World of Warcraft content itself, comics, novelizations, the amazing WoW Wiki website, Wowpedia, Engadget, and various other sources online. So please do bear with me if I happen to get something wrong, or you can write to the show and let me know what I've gotten wrong at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. I love to be corrected, guys, so please do let me know. After talking about the lore, we'll discuss what you, yes, you there, sitting there in your pajamas at your desktop wondering if you should bother taking a shower today. I got wild and opted for no. We'll discuss what you said about the content back in the day, and some of the more memorable aspects of the content from the community's point of view. But just before we get to the good stuff, please do bear with me for a bit of housekeeping. I just want to let you know that you can find all things Countdown to Classic online at countdowntoclassic.com. More importantly, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and like, follow, or subscribe to the show on social media. You can find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Countdown to Classic, on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, and on the show's YouTube channel at Countdown to Classic. One small favor I would ask is that if you're currently listening to the show on YouTube and you're liking what you're hearing, then please do click the download or stream links on the website as well, as I primarily lean on those figures as a look into how the show is growing. Now, as Countdown to Classic is a show about you, the players, this is an interactive experience, and I absolutely want to hear your feedback or your input on the show. You can drop me a line on all socials or email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Please do hang around until the tail end of the show for further thank yous and shout outs, and I'll give you some show updates and also just some general pocket pissing. And with all that said, and without any further ado, it's time for a scoop of vanilla. Shadowfang Keep is a level 22 to 30 instance in the game with a minimum level of 14, and obviously is a 5-man instance. A haunted keep near the borders of Gilneas. The large keep is located on a high bluff overlooking Pirewood Village. It is the former base of operations for the demented Archmage Arugal. And I just want to let you know, everyone, that I looked into the pronunciation of the word Archmage just for this episode. As you know, I'm a bit of a stickler for pronunciation. And I found a blue post, funnily enough, on this very topic, when game designer Dave Kosak said the following about 2 years ago. Not kidding. We were actually on the phone with the studio in LA as we were recording Khadgar's dialogue, or perhaps Cordana's dialogue, since she calls him by his title so often. And we suddenly stopped dead in our tracks because we weren't positive how to pronounce Archmage. Big debate ensued. Lots of Googling. Even the sound engineers were weighing in. Anyways, the final call was for it to be pronounced Archmage, which is what you'll hear Cordana and others say during their dialogue. And Khadgar approved. Now, in light of that blue post about the proper pronunciation from Blizzard on the word Archmage, and they're saying it should be Archmage, guess what? Fuck them. I've looked into it even further, and I found that it very much so could be either or. And as far as I'm concerned, the proper English way is Archmage. So I'm sorry if you disagree with me, but that's how I'm going to be saying it. So please deal with it. Anyway, Archmage Arugal, with his Worgen children, wrested the keep from Baron Silverlane, a noble who owed allegiance to Gilneas. It is now the Archmage's base of operations for he and his Worgen progeny. So, Shadowfang Keep, why were we there? Or perhaps more importantly, who were we there to kill? Because the term adventurers that people use for us, I think is somewhat of a euphemism for murderers or assassins. That's more basically what we were. Oh, you need someone killed? Well, lucky for you, that's kind of our jam. Yeah, no, don't explain it. No, I don't need to know why. You want someone dead and I'm very willing to provide my services. See, you might struggle with the concept of taking life, but we do not, sir. You know what? I'll show you. You don't have a dog or an animal or anything you want put down? No? You know it's free, right? No, alright, your loss. Anyway, we banded together as a group of adventurers/murderers and we headed off to Shadowfang Keep. But, as I suggested, why exactly were we there and what was the history of this location? Well, we just heard a few names and places, so now I'm going to get into diving into the history of Shadowfang Keep. And we really do, in doing so, need to focus on one man in particular. Jesus. Okay, maybe not Jesus. There's enough lore on him out there. But it's actually Archmage Arugal. We need to focus on this man, obviously being the Lord of Shadowfang Keep. Now, Archmage Arugal. Arugal was originally a respected patriot of Gilneas, a human kingdom located in the peninsula that lies to the southwest of Silverpine Forest, and was presumably, because I couldn't find any reference to it, born and raised there. Born in Gilneas, I was born in Gilneas. I guess it doesn't quite have the same ring to it as the Boss's tune, but you get the point. Anyway. At some point of his adult life, Arugal decided that Gilneas wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and he decided to leave home to follow his dream of playing in the NBA. His dream was to head to Dalaran, a major-cratic city-state which was once located by the Lordimir Lake on the Alterac Mountains shore in the Eastern Kingdoms, to become a member of the Kirin Tor, a specialized sect that was charged with cataloging and researching every spell, artifact, and magic item known to mankind at the time, and was also Dalaran's ruling power. Now, talk about the original elitist jerks. I think the Kirin Tor very much were so. Anyway, as foreshadowed at the top of the show, Arugal did realize his dream and became an Archmage. Now, Archmagi are a type of powerful caster that represents the pinnacle of magical power. Most Archmagi hail from Dalaran, but they can be found among other groups as well. Now, once setting himself up with the social movers and shakers of Dalaran and totally winding up on page 6 on a regular basis, Arugal thrived in the Dalaran Majocratic Society. During this period, Dalaran was home to many of the greatest sorcerers of the day, including Antonidas, who we've heard about before, Khadgar, Jaina Proudmoore, who we've heard about before, Kel'Thuzad, who we've also heard about before, and even Arugal himself. However, as we heard in episode 2 of Countdown to Classic, and guys, please do go back and listen to that if you haven't already, and for that matter, go back and listen to all the Countdown to Classics if you haven't already, because they're all great. Kel'Thuzad eventually left Dalaran for the sexy, seductive call of the Leech King, and soon after that, the Scourge was unleashed upon the land, with one of their primary targets being Dalaran, mainly due to its housing of the Book of Medivh, a spellbook written by, hey, fancy that, Medivh, the last guardian of Tirisfal, being an ancient line of protectors bestowed with great powers to do battle with the agents of the Burning Legion. Dalaran found itself powerless to stop Prince Arthas and his forces when he led the Scourge through Lordaeron. Antonidas instructed Jaina Proudmoore to take a number of citizens and flee to Kalimdor. Not long after, the city itself was attacked by the Scourge, led by Arthas. The Dalaran Guard Towers and the Archmagi organizations in the city tried to defend it, with Arugal amongst them, but they, alongside the powerful Archmage Antonidas, fell to Arthas in battle shortly after. However, Arugal barely managed to escape before the sacking of the city was complete. I'm guessing that he ran off to the toilet sometime when shit really started going down. Arthas acquired the spellbook of Medivh. It was just such a shame that he couldn't read. Okay, no, he could read, and he went over it with Kel'Thuzad, and they used it to summon Archimonde. Oh, God, here we go. Josh, you're all over the place. Back to the Arch versus Arch argument. Why is it Archmage, and why is it Archimonde? Look, I don't make the rules. I don't know. This is all insane, but just go with your heart, guys. Thus, the reign of chaos began with the summoning of Archimonde. Kel'Thuzad was amazed at the amount of information about demons that was contained within the spellbook of Medivh. Now what happened was obviously Archimonde destroyed the city of Dalaran in mere seconds. The great demon single-handedly laid waste to the city by creating a magical effigy out of the dust, which he then crushed, and the mighty towers of Dalaran fell simultaneously. Later, the remnants of the city went to chaos, with mutants, renegade wizards, and berserk water elementals roaming the streets. But Arugal, as we suggested, fled just before shit really went south, and he reluctantly returned to Gilneas, like the proverbial prodigal son that he was, in order to aid King Gen Greymane. Is it Gen or Gen? I can't remember. I'm going with Gen. Anyway. Arugal arrived in Gilneas just as the Scourge's tear through Lordaeron eventually found its way to the gates of the human kingdom. Seeing the Scourge and their demonic masters rampage through what was left of Lordaeron and Dalaran, Arugal was convinced that there was nothing too dire to be invoked in the defense of his people. Bolstered by King Greymane's desire to defend Gilneas from the Scourge before it could find a way past the wall, and with the tides turning in the Scourge's favour with defences dwindling, Arugal made use of the Book of U-R. I actually think it's Ur. Let's go with that. Ur. A tome of mystical lore and studies of other dimensions and states of reality. He sought to summon creatures even more fearsome than the undead to fight against them. So what could be more fearsome than the undead? Well, in his book, Ur published his research into a race of beings called the Worgen, a werewolf-type being that Ur had spent much time studying, and because Arugal was totally a boss student and totally thought he could pull this off, he summoned the savage and beastly Worgen to lend a hand in Gilneas. Now, we chuck a hard handbrake turn at this point, everyone, because what we're going to have to do now is dive down the deep rabbit hole of who or what are the Worgen. Very sharp tangent warning, and this is going to go on for a little while, guys, so please do bear with me as we go through now the history of the Worgen. Now, the main source for the history of the Worgen comes from some of the Warcraft comics that were published a few years back, and the story goes as such. The Worgen were actually originally Night Elf druids. Now, what do we know about Night Elf druids? Obviously, they are shapeshifters. We've seen some of their more familiar forms: bear, cat, tree. However, back in the day, there was also another form that they were able to take, titled the pack form. However, its use was very much so frowned upon and banned by OG Druid and General Head Honcho, Malfurion Stormrage, the first Night Elf Druid who initiated the mainstream use of Druidism amongst the Night Elven people 10 millennia ago under tutelage of the demigod Cenarius within Val-Shara. Anyway, during the War of the Ancients, a conflict that rocked ancient Azeroth some 10,000 years prior to the First War, and with the Night Elves pushing shit up a hill against the deadly Satyr forces in ancient Kalimdor, a desperate young druid named R'hllor pled with Malfurion, please, we are getting our asses kicked over here. Can we assume the pack form so that we can start actually fighting back on a level playing field? Unfortunately, Malfurion effectively said, sorry, no cigar. The problem was, R'hllor, a very talented druid himself, had come to realize that the pack form was a form of pure ferocity, the very essence of rage, and it was exactly what his race needed in order to effectively fight back. However, he couldn't get past the stubborn Malfurion in being able to use this form. Malfurion was incredibly firm and said nay. They had lost many Kaldorei to the Satyr armies, and they'd also lost a few to pack form. Those night elves who used the pack form previously were actually eventually consumed by rage and turned on each other and eventually disappeared into the wild. However, R'hllor wasn't alone in his infatuation with the pack form. There were a few other druids who felt the same way about this cool new form. And they included R'hllor's closest friend Arvel and Arvel's love, a priestess named Belisra. R'hllor and Arvel hatched a little plan of their own in defiance of Malfurion's orders, obviously never to use this forbidden form. And they decided to launch a little bit of a side attack of their own, a sneak attack on the Satyr. However, this attack went south, and in an attempt to save themselves from the murderous Satyr, they assumed the pack form. And by doing so, they actually managed to escape the hot water, but they also wound up succumbing to the rage whilst in pack form, and they turned on their very own and attacked both Satyr and Night Elf without being able to realize the difference between friend and foe. Malfurion turned up and managed to put a stop to their furious efforts, and angry as all hell, ordered them to cease all attempts to ever again master the pack form. Now, the reason Malfurion was so very against this pack form was that he actually knew a fair bit about it. Reason being, he had dabbled in a bit of pack forming himself in the past. But when he did it, he was so unable to control the very savage essence of the form. He turned on Cenarius, who quickly put Stormrage in his place when that happened. Cenarius took Malfurion to Duralnir and managed to coax the druid back into his former state, ridding him of the savagery of the pack form. This is why Malfurion was so against the pack form and wanted nothing to do with the Worgen. But I'm not sure if Malfurion actually told the other druids about his knowledge of this horrible form and why he hated it so much. A little bit like Holdo in Last Jedi. Let's just not tell anyone what's going on. Soon after the ill-fated attack on the Satyr, Arvel was speaking with Belisra and confessing his guilt and shame over having defied Malfurion's orders. However, Belisra said to him that she felt there actually were some benefits of the pack form, and perhaps it wasn't something to be thrown away still so easily. After all, if Arvel had not transformed into the pack form, he very well could be dead. Arvel told her that there was no way he would defy Malfurion again. However, this turned out to be a pretty poor decision on Arvel's behalf, because not long after that, he and Belisra discovered a Satyr outpost close to Kaldorei territory and decided to attack. However, during this attack, now that he was being a goody-goody two-shoes and not defying Malfurion's orders to resort to pack form, he wound up very much so dead. Belisra, infuriated and grieving incessantly over the death of her lover, absolutely blamed nothing but Malfurion's unwillingness to yield on the choice of pack form. And she shelved the blame for Arvel's demise purely on Stormrage's shoulders. When news of his great friend's death reached Arvel, Arvel was understandably very perturbed. He and Belisra got together and had a little bit of a chat, eventually deciding that they would not let Arvel's death be for naught. He forged a plan to peek into the possibilities of the pack form even further, despite Stormrage's orders to leave well enough alone. After doing some digging, R'hllor discovered that the druids thought to have been lost earlier to the pack form, the so-called druids of the pack, had not actually vanished as previously surmised, and R'hllor spent some time actually speaking to these feral druids. Though savage, these druids were incredibly powerful. The sheer violence and undeniable power that they displayed captivated R'hllor. Inspired by the legend of Elune, the major deity worshipped by the Night Elves and mother of Cenarius, and Goldrin, an ancient guardian, one of several demigods on Azeroth that takes the form of a monstrously powerful white wolf, not the Winter Soldier, R'hllor was led to his next decision. If Elune sought to tame Goldrin, then perhaps an item could be made that would do just that. Tame the druids of the pack. That item could be created and infused with the very essence of Elune, and it was to be a staff created by Belisra, and a special artifact, a fang from the Wolf Ancient himself, the Fang of Goldrin. Together, these two artifacts would be wielded into one object, the Scythe of Elune. And the scythe was the very item that R'hllor would use to tame these vicious druids of the pack and convince them to control their savage nature to the point that they could actually focus their anger and rage into an undeniable power to bring down a common foe, i.e. the satyr. However, R'hllor grossly underestimated the possible effects of dabbling in something you knew fuck all about, because what happened next was Belisra imbued the scythe with Elune's essence, as instructed. R'hllor transformed into the pack form and prepared himself to receive the power of awesomeness, being the taming of the scythe, but instead of receiving said taming of the pack form's ferocity, something entirely unforeseen actually happened. R'hllor's wolf form continued to transform, twisting his body into a warped, half-humanoid wolf that continued the rage of Goldrin and the power of Elune, burning R'hllor and searing him to the core until he embraced it, turning R'hllor into the ultimate rage monster. Instead of being a tamed, powerful wolf, the scythe had actually created the very first druid of the scythe, or Worgen as we know them today. Ta-da! R'hllor abandoned his name and actually decided to start calling himself Alpha Prime. Pretty cool name. I'll co-sign that one. That's all right. Alpha Prime urged the other wolves of the pack to share in the blessing of the scythe. And the scythe actually did work as intended. The Worgen were tamed into joining the Night Elves in an attack against another outpost of Satyr and absolutely annihilated them with unbridled ferocity that actually shocked the Kaldorei that they were fighting with. But what shocked the Night Elves even further was that these crazy wolfmen, once they were done with the Satyr, turned on the Kaldorei and started knocking them off. As Belisra watched the Worgen tear shreds off of the satyr, she felt vengeance for her great love. However, she became perturbed when she realized that the Worgen were now turning on Malfurion Stormrage once the job was done, with Alpha Prime demanding blood as justice for Arvel's death. Belisra was mortified that the very creatures that she had had a direct hand in creating began turning on the Kaldorei, biting the Night Elves that leapt to defend Malfurion. The Night Elves that were bitten immediately began to change, morphing into the very same wolves that had bitten them, and quickly succumbing to the rage of the Worgen. Though the bulk of the Night Elves managed to escape, many were lost to the Worgen, and this was the very first instance of the curse of the Worgen. Malfurion left that day with a very valuable lesson tucked under his wing, that the powers of the Druid came with an equally powerful price. and that he had to work harder in ensuring young druids in the future never touched experiments like this ever again. After speaking with Cenarius, Malfurion gathered his fellow druids together and decided to form the Cenarian Circle, an organisation of druids that we still see in Azeroth today. The circle was formed as a direct result of this Worgen disaster, though few actually do know its origins. It was created to show druids the right way of doing things, in order to establish a bit of tradition amongst druidic teachings that could be followed for generations after. Think of it as sort of like Druid University. I heard their football team sucks though. The first order of business for the newly formed Cenarian Circle was to figure out how to deal with R'hllor, or Alpha Prime, and his Worgen brothers. Now, Malfurion Stormrange realised that the Scythe had obviously created the Worgen, so could it be used to alternatively temper them? The Scythe tore through the boundary between reality and the Emerald Dream. Within the dream existed a great tree, Duralnir, that soothed the savage heart of beasts, and it was Malfurion's intent to banish the Worgen into the Emerald Dream, where they would sleep beneath Duralnir and dream the eternal dream of the wild. What a great night's sleep that would be. With Malfurion's plans now laid out, he needed to effectively lure the Worgen to him. For that, he enlisted the help of Belisra, who was so ashamed at what she'd done that she was very, very happy to help out and get back into Malfurion's good books. So, she took it upon herself to seek out the Druids of the Scythe and ask them, "Hey guys, we're having ice cream, do you want to join us?" And they were like, "Ice cream? Totes, we like vanilla." Get it? Get it? Anyway, what she said was, "Hey, would you like to come and figure out Malfurion's punishment?" The Worgen were fooled by the ruse, and they came along to meet with Stormrage, who quickly overpowered Alpha Prime and his Worgen brethren, sending them to dream eternally at the foot of Duralnir. And thus the Worgen were banished to the Emerald Dream, where they engaged in a long slumber. But this was far from the end of the Worgen. Though they dreamed the dream of the wild, they always sought a way to escape. Now, the Emerald Dream was considered somewhat of a paradise to most druids. It was absolute heaven. It was the Playboy Mansion. It was the grotto. It was the place you wanted to be. However, to the Worgen, it was absolute torture beyond comprehension. And within the confines of this torturous imprisonment, the Worgen grew more vicious than ever. As mentioned earlier, the magician Ur of Dalaran began researching the Worgen through his studies into beings from other dimensions, and he wrote the following. The Worgen's home is a dark place, a place of nightmare. If that world fosters locations safe from the cursed Worgen, then my research has revealed no such bastions. And if one considers the ferocity and wickedness of the Worgen, it is likely that no such bastions exist. It is surmised that the Worgen are content to remain on their world, for although some Worgen possess powerful magic, they've made no attempts to reach Azeroth of their own accord, and for this we are fortunate. It is my hope that no Dalaran wizard seeks out the Worgen, even if done in light conscience. For no pact may be struck, no secrets may be learned, no good can come from these beasts. They are best left to their world, for if found in ours and not destroyed, our peril will be dire. And due to those words, Ur stopped short of ever attempting to experiment on the Worgen. However, guess who didn't? Our man Arugal. And now we come all the way back to our boy who we were talking about before after that long detour. Okay, here we go. Back to Archmage Arugal, who was totally willing to go there in terms of the Worgen. Now, how did he come across the Worgen? Well, as mentioned earlier, the Scourge laid waste to Dalaran, but soon after that, they set their sights on the rest of Lordaeron, and quickly coming up was Gilneas. Now, Gilneas set up a stout defense, shutting up the city walls and sitting tight within. However, with the Scourge beginning to assault the nation, King Gen Greymane ordered Arugal to use Yuur's research and summon the Worgen. Fortunately for Arugal, the summoning worked as it was intended. Unfortunately for Arugal, Alpha Prime and the rest of the Worgen weren't quite the cool new toy that he was hoping for. Now, in deciding to summon the Worgen, Arugal obviously based everything he knew of them from the writings of Yuur, who, despite being a knowledgeable scholar, knew almost nothing of druidic lore and the cosmology of the Emerald Dream. So his writings were a little bit half-educated when he started talking about what the Worgen were. And as such, he painted them in his writings as nearly mindless beasts, not as potent druids trapped between forms. Yuur didn't grasp the nature of the Emerald Dream as a realm where dreamers exist, and unfortunately the result of that was that Arugal couldn't control the Worgen when he summoned them forth from their sleep, and he very quickly lost the ability to give them directions. In spite of that, however, Alpha Prime and the Worgen actually did do exactly what they were intended to do. They took care of the Scourge and got them to move along from Gilneas. Mission accomplished, right? Well, not quite, because then, exactly as they had done in the past, after serving their quote-unquote masters, they then turned on them, and Arugal and the rest of the wizards and the armies of Gilneas now found themselves basically fighting these beasts instead of the Scourge. The Worgen savagely turned on the Gilneans and began to bite various members of the Gilnean army and the public. Though originally the bite of a Worgen was an immediate catalyst for transformation into another Worgen, thousands of years in the Emerald Dream had actually diluted the effects of the bite. So what was happening was that soldiers were being bitten by these Worgen, but were then being taken back into Gilneas to recover, and over time they would eventually turn into a Worgen themselves rather than on the spot when bitten. And once they made the transformation, they obviously then began to attack their fellow Gilneans from within the city. But what happened as a result of that to the great nation of Gilneas, perhaps we'll touch on in another episode, although many of you may damn well know because you played through it, but perhaps all of Gilneas and what happened from this point on I'll do another time on the show. But for now we divert back to what Arugal did as a result of this. Arugal's summoned Worgen began to run wild through Pyrewood, and their curse was spread through the people of the village. The Worgen also broke into Baron Silverlane's keep and slaughtered or transformed everyone they came into contact with there. Baron Silverlane had lived peacefully in the keep, which was situated on his ancestral lands. He ruled over the settlers of the nearby Pyrewood village, and the Baron seemed a relatively capable leader. That is, until the coming of the Scourge. But the keep, after the Worgen moved in, went from a place of refuge to an absolute bloodbath, and Arugal turned from being a concerned Gilnean patriot to a broken, guilt-ravaged survivor who believed himself to be some sort of father to the Worgen that he had unleashed upon the world. However, one point of interest was that whilst Arugal couldn't control the wild Worgen, they actually somehow seemed unable to destroy him, or just not terribly interested in doing so. They just let him be within the keep. So, taking stock of these horrible beasts that he had unleashed upon the world, Arugal fell into deep madness and despair, surrounded by walking corpses and raging Worgen within the confines of the keep. He eventually embraced the Worgen and declared himself Lord and Master of the newly dubbed Shadowfang Keep. The curse of the Worgen continued to spread south. Some did flee and escape the keep, however the majority stayed and called Shadowfang home. Alpha Prime revelled in this spreading of the curse throughout Gilneas and Silverpine Forest, and he made use of Arugal and spread his so-called wolf cult throughout the land. Shadowfang Keep quickly fell into shadow and ruin, with Arugal setting up shop, being protected by his massive pet Fenris, and also haunted by the vengeful ghost of Baron Silverlane. However, whilst operating from Shadowfang Keep, Arugal simply made too many enemies, both amongst Horde and Alliance, and that was eventually the cause of Arugal's downfall, as some ragtag adventurers / murderers were called in to fix the situation. And that's the story of Shadowfang Keep and the Worgen and Archmage Arugal. But once we, as those adventurers, were asked to head into Shadowfang Keep and take care of Arugal for good, who did we bump into when we got there? Well, here's a quick refresher course on some of the bosses and mini-bosses of Shadowfang Keep. Rethelgor, one of the most vicious Worgen, entrusted by Archmage Arugal to guard the prisoners who have been caught breaking into Shadowfang Keep. Who the fuck would want to break into Shadowfang Keep? Seems odd. Anyway. The Fell Steed. The Fell Steed was a mini-boss monster. Their spawning was a bit more complex than that of a normal mini-boss, as there can be anywhere between 0 to 3 Fell Steeds that actually spawn at a time through a run in the dungeon. A Fell Steed which doesn't spawn is replaced by its slightly weaker non-boss counterpart, the Shadow Charger. How did these horses come to life? Are they real Fell Steeds? No one can tell for sure, but one thing for certain is that they belong to Archmage Arugal. He is the reason behind these horses' creation, even if the method is yet to be known. Even though it is unclear whether these horses are actual Fell Steeds, as the blazing fire doesn't radiate from them as it should from a regular Fell Steed, however, they should not be underestimated, for there's a reason why there's 3 horses, yet no one to ride them. Razorclaw the Butcher inhabits the former kitchen of Shadowfang Keep. He slaughtered many innocent humans in Shadowfang Keep when brought in by Master Arugal, hence his nickname. Baron Silverlane is a human ghost located in the dining hall or great hall via teleport. Baron Silverlane was master of the keep before it fell to Arugal's Worgen. Now his cursed spirit calls upon the very wolf beast that slaughtered him to punish further trespassers into his home. Commander Springvale is located in the chapel. A loyal soldier, the ghost of Commander Springvale, haunts the council room, using unholy strikes to avenge his lord, Baron Silverlane. Odo the Blind Watcher. He lives in the dilapidated wooden structure hanging precariously off the side of the keep with 2 pet bats, a Bloodseeker and a Vile Bat. Although he lost his eyesight a long time ago, hence the nickname, he has adapted to using his other senses, much like his pets. Deathsworn Captain. Now this is a rare spawn boss that's encountered right after Odo the Blind Watcher, if he spawns. The Deathsworn Captain was a loyal captain who died during the Worgen raid of the keep, but death did not relieve this man of his duty. Sworn to obey, the captain watches over the keep once more. Fenris, a massive warg, was the pet of Arugal. Fenris prowled the main study of Arugal's chambers. He was unbelievably large, and it is possible the warg was subject to dark magic at the hands of Arugal or the Worgen. Whenever Fenris detected a player, he let out a thundering roar that could be heard from everywhere in the instance. Arugal would come to see adventurers off when they battled this warg, summoning 4 of Arugal's Void Walkers, which you would have to kill. These were non-elite and didn't hit hard. Fenris cannot be tamed. Wolfmaster Nandos, the Worgen master of the lesser wargs, and he had his own pack which would fight heroes before they'd engage him. He was the last henchman of Arugal to obstruct the path. And then, obviously, the final boss was Archmage Arugal, a level 21 elite who we now know plenty about, and I won't go into, obviously. Anyway, that was Shadowfang Keep, everyone. Now it's time to find out what we said about Shadowfang Keep back in the day with That's What We Said. Each Wednesday, I trawl through some of the older forum posts in relation to the content that we've just discussed from back in the vanilla days. So, what were we all saying about Shadowfang Keep back in the day? Well, the first point that I want to raise is that many of us mentioned that Shadowfang Keep was one of our favorite dungeons from back in the day. Now, personally, I'm in on this one. I loved Shadowfang Keep. Why did I love Shadowfang Keep? I'm a big fan of the mood, look, and feel of this particular instance. Now, I loved these dark, eerie areas that were contained within the game. Duskwood is a particular favorite of mine, and Tirisfal Glades, and obviously Silverpine Forest. And with this instance being located in Silverpine Forest, it followed that this instance took on the look and feel of the area. Now, that grey, eerie, dark tone that it had to it had a macabre, gothic, old world vibe to it, which I really enjoyed. Now, as we do here on Countdown to Classic, I'm just going to quote a few posts from some of the forums. And we start with user Blue Freedom 420, who says the following: easily one of my favorite dungeons. It was basically Castlevania. And I very much agree with that. It really did have a little bit of that Symphony of the Night kind of vibe to it. And I really liked that. User Newer Style Movies says, I've always liked SFK. I think the key thing is the transition from outside to inside and inside to outside. The fact that you can view Silverpine from the ramparts of the castle is also very cool. It reminds me of the first major area in Dark Souls. So now we've had a distinction drawn between Shadowfang Keep and Castlevania and Dark Souls, two obviously beloved games with a certain tone about them, and I very much agree with that, and that's also why I love those games. But we also turn to another interesting point raised by user Undoer, who says this: Shadowfang Keep for me always feels like a prototype of Karazhan. There's a lot of similarities between the two instances, especially the feeling moving through the dungeon to new environments and witnessing the dungeon from new perspectives as you progress through it, such as looking down to opera when moving up. Similarly, it also tries to give you a sense of perspective with the balconies to show you how much you've progressed up Medivh's tower. Now, there's another post that agrees with that from user Crazy Bear, who says this: I'm surprised no one's mentioned that before. Take a look at this instance and then compare it with Karazhan. There are quite a few similarities between the two. 1, it's based on an old abandoned keep. 2, the bridge that leads into SFK is similar to the back entrance in Karazhan. 3, the starting areas both involve fighting a beast boss. 4, after downing the first boss, you make your way into a dining area to down the next 2 bosses, similar to Moreau's. 5, even the lore seems similar. You have Horde or Alliance investigating the keep as to what Arugal was doing, and you have the Violet Eye investigating the mansion as to what Medivh's activities were. Now, they're all great points, and I think that's actually something that I had never thought of before, and now I feel like quite the fool for never having drawn that distinction. Shadowfang Keep does really take on a lot of the tonal aspects of Karazhan, and now when I think about how I progressed through those two instances, they do feel eerily the same. Now, I understand Shadowfang Keep is, on a much sort of more scaled down level, but I enjoyed them just as much. Well, no, that's a lie. I fucking loved Karazhan, but I did enjoy Shadowfang Keep a lot, and I felt the same going through them. How did you feel? Write to the show and let me know. We continue to turn to the forums for another few interesting notes about Shadowfang Keep from back in the day. We have this post from the official forums, and I do apologize to the user as I've forgotten their name, but they said the following: Dead Mines / Shadowfang Keep. Those 2 starter dungeons were great and let you take a couple of complete noobs who would listen and train them in the art of dungeon crawl. Now, that's a really good point because obviously Shadowfang Keep was very much so a relatively entry-level dungeon. It could have even been the case that it was a lot of people's first dungeons. If you were plodding through vanilla, not really sure what you were doing, and you might have skipped a few of those first couple and then realized sort of in your early 20s, wait, they have these things called instances? Hell yeah, I want to go there. And then maybe you walked your way into Shadowfang. And it was within the bounds of this instance that wasn't necessarily considered a pushover back in the day, everyone, unless I'm grossly mistaken. Please do let me know, because as the user suggests, it taught us, as they put it beautifully, the art of the dungeon crawl. There was a little bit of strategy required in Shadowfang Keep. It wasn't a pushover, and a boss like Arugal was actually relatively challenging. Now, I know you're scoffing at that now because we would tear through it, but honestly think back to how you were skilled as a player the first time you went through Shadowfang Keep. Did you roll through Arugal? Perhaps some of you did, but I'll read you a post from user Darmonic who says the following. It was fun going into SFK and having Arugal turn someone into a Worgen and the whole fight going south. So what did you think of the difficulty of Shadowfang Keep back in the day? Did you see it as the first minor spike in difficulty as you were leveling up, perhaps going through it at level 22, 23, 24 and being like, holy shit, this game isn't messing around. I've actually died a few times during this instance. Or did you completely face roll it? Write to the show and let me know. Now, the final point I want to raise from what we said about Shadowfang Keep back in the day is that it was very much so a popular place to get to for twink items, with some of the best twink gear being found on bosses and trash mobs within the instance. And I looked to a quote from user Jimmy Quadruple2 who said the following, "When you get Assassin's Blade, it's like fucking heaven." And a lot of us obviously went there looking for the Assassin's Blade. But this was not an easy drop by any means. As forum poster Elt reminds us with the following. I was going to farm Assassin's Blade for my twink. I got all rare epics except Assassin's Blade and Shadowfang. I got Black Malice, Night Reaver, 2 Mindthirst braces, Gloom Shroud vest, Guillotine axe. I got so pissed off that I didn't even mind to sell those other blues to the auction house, so I vended them. After farming for a week, like 4 to 6 hours per day, I stopped. And I noticed that my friend boosted his friend in SFK, and he got it and gave it to his own twink. I really got pissed off and almost deleted my twink. But after a while, I scammed so much that I now have 2 Assassin's Blades with 15 agility on both. And I'm probably the best twink in the server now. So everything turned out well. And that was my life story until now. But yeah, a lot of us went hunting for the Assassin's Blade and also, as that user just mentioned, Shadowfang. These were 2 amazing items that obviously everyone wanted on particular twinks back in the day. Did you spend hours and hours and hours farming for these items? Did you spend hours and hours and hours just clearing out this dungeon, helping out friends who might have been looking for them? Again, write to the show and let me know what your memories were. And with all that done, everyone, now it's time for anger management. Each episode of Countdown to Classic, I come to you with some of the angriest posts that I've found on the forums in relation to the content that we've just discussed. So, in regards to Shadowfang Keep, here's a few of the posts that I found that stood out. User Kabloosh says the following. SFK sucked. It was long, with pushover bosses that were pretty much trash with higher stats. SFK had the worst debuffs in the game, all of which were curses. And then we get this submission. Don't head to Shadowfang in hopes of getting the Assassin's Blade or Shadowfang Sword drop. I've run SFK over 50 times in the last month, and I haven't seen it. Even a guildmate was running it as well, and she didn't have any luck. I ended up just running it over and over again to gear up my Blood Elf Rogue for BC. Next, we have this submission from Zarkus. Now, this one actually took place post-vanilla, but I still thought it was pretty funny, so I'd throw it in. While doing a guild run through Shadowfang Keep last night, we met the Horses from Hell. In the room where the chefs were, I pulled a group of 4 trash mobs in the room with the Baron. During the fight at one point, I found myself in the corner that was right behind where the horses in the stables were, and used Blood Boil. This AoE attack hit the horses through the wall, and led to the Great Stampede Massacre of 2010. Please make it so that AoEs won't hit through walls. Thank you. And with those angry posts done, now it's time to turn to Tidbits. Each Wednesday I come to you with a few little-known facts about the content that we've just discussed. Or you may very well know all of them. But let's see how we go. The first point about Shadowfang Keep is the following. Did you know that there was a Scourge Invasion only boss placed into Shadowfang Keep? This boss was named Sever. Now, Sever was a level 25 Elite Abomination mini-boss found inside the keep, and he was placed in there during both the first and the second Scourge Invasion. Now, obviously, there was a Scourge Invasion during Vanilla, and that's when he was first seen by the players. He sits in a square room along the corridor that runs parallel to the Great Hall and Kitchen in Shadowfang Keep, and was a neat little thing to see for a short while there after that invasion. Next, did you know that Shadowfang Keep probably earned its name from the rumours of the Worgen that guard it? Now that might speak for itself, but what we then ask ourselves is, well, what was Shadowfang Keep called before it was Shadowfang Keep? There is speculation that it may have been called Silverlane Keep or Pyrewood Keep. If you know what it was called, or if you've got a good guess, send it in. Next, I found the following on the forums, and did you know that according to one user, apparently you could jump over the fencing off the high wall, I presume they mean along the ramparts, I'm not sure, back to the Silverpine Forest. This user says that they tried that and successfully pulled it off. You start falling, and then a loading screen would appear. And then, when the loading screen goes away, you're still very much falling to your death. They discovered this and actually fell and still had around 50 health left on the level 39 Tauren Druid. So, lucky them, they didn't die, but as they say, still no Shadowfang. And the final tidbit about Shadowfang Keep is, did you know that the death of Silverlane and Springvale will trigger the spawning of patrols behind the party that will intercept them about 1 or 2 minutes after those bosses have died? Your party should be aware of this if discussing loot or progressing onwards. It's safest to wait in the boss rooms for the patrol to turn up rather than get them as an unwelcome surprise when you're already engaged in a fight. But that's it. Thank you all. That's been the episode for today. And as I said, I want to give a few quick shout outs to some of the international listeners that continuously tune in to Countdown to Classic. Big shout out to Canada. Big shout out to Denmark. And a huge shout out to Norway. I love your women, Norway. I went to uni with a lot of them and they're crazy drinkers. They're my kind of people. And also everyone, the Belarus watch continues as we hold our breath until Belarus wakes up and downloads an episode of Countdown to Classic, despite the fact that most of Europe has to this point. And just a couple more quick points, guys. Thank you so much to the fans sending in tips about the show and contacting me and mentioning additions they'd love to see on Countdown to Classic. Now, one listener mentioned that they'd like to see a sort of tips and tricks section. Is that something that you guys would like to see? Write to the show and let me know. It would be fan-based, so it would be based on the submissions that I would need from you guys. So just write to me and let me know what you think about that. And also, one thing I really would like to mention, everyone, if you would really like to help and support this show, can you please leave a review for the show on iTunes? If you're at a desktop or just mucking around on your cell phone now, take the 20 seconds to jump on the iTunes store and throw in a review for the show. You can just tap. You don't need to type any words in it. It's really quick and easy, and it would just help me out so much if you could do that for me. Anyway, the final point I want to make is if you just can't get enough of my voice for one reason or another, please do also check out my other podcast, The Cinephiles. And that can be found at cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. We're a comedy movie podcast, and we break down and recap all of your favorite movies from back in the day. And we have a lot of laughs while doing so, everyone. It really is good fun. So if you feel like a good laugh today and you want to hear about some of your favorite movies of all time, jump on the website, download a few episodes and check us out. I guarantee you will have a good time. But anyway, that's it for Countdown to Classic today. Please come back for Monday's show when we cover the news again, and I can't wait to catch up with you then. Thanks so much, everyone. That's it for today. See you later.